Hello there. My name is Jeff. I think I might have the bubonic plague, and this is the first in a series of screencasts on Project 4, the proposal assignment. So if you take a look down at the second item under this new section on our schedule page, you'll see this link to writing proposals. And here we'll talk a little bit about Chapter 4 of this textbook, A Little Argument. Now, again, our major textbook, as you all know, is Scenes of Writing. And we're going to talk a little bit about the reading that corresponds to this assignment in a screencast that I'll probably release tomorrow rather than tonight. But you might recall I scanned a few chapters from this other one, this other book, and I put it on Blackboard. And we, read and discussed those earlier. What I'd like you to do is take a look back at the end of Chapter 4 of those scanned readings. And that's pages specifically 114 to 126. And we're going to talk a little bit about those via this link to writing proposals. So again, this kind of spread here at the end of the scan section of a little argument that we talked about briefly before kind of walks us through proposals as a stasis. So remember, we talked about what are called stasis arguments, that the idea that kind of every argument will fit into this list of maybe 7 or 8 different categories. Everything's either an argument that's a definition, an evaluation, a cause-consequence, a rebuttal, or in this case, a proposal. Now, as we also discussed, often all different kinds or many different elements of these different stases will be involved in one argument. So whenever you're proposing something, you're probably going to be evaluating something at the same time. You're going to be suggesting that what you're proposing is something that's good, so that's an evaluation. Whenever you're defining something, you're probably making evaluative claims, you might be proposing something as well. The difference is maybe in what kind of emphasis you put on it. So what is the emphasis of a proposal argument? How can you use that emphasis to kind of brainstorm a good topic for Project 4? And what are the things you want to make sure you include within a proposal argument so it's recognizable as an entry into that genre of writing, and also it'll just be effective for its objectives and its purposes. So again, you got a lot of good material on this in the section of a little argument, and we can take a quick look at that here. Boop. So you see here they have a little map to emphasize kind of the first thing you want to make sure you know about proposal arguments, which is that they're geared towards making sure someone or some group of people should or should not do something, right? So as you can kind of tell by this diagram, you have your audience, that's the someone. There's something you want them to do, and then you're going to have to identify why you want them to do that as well, right? But once you've decided those things, there's many other elements of proposal you have to think about as well. And your book here breaks it down into there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. We might talk about them a little more closely and maybe dwell on some of them more than others as part of these notes right here. So again, proposal always attempts to make some people decide to take some action. So what you have to think about is, what is the problem that you want to take up for your proposal, right? So if you're proposing something, you're suggesting that we take some kind of action in regard to some kind of situation. If you're proposing something should be done, we presume it's about a problem. We'll talk about the problem in a second, but let's think about that first part, the someone. Who's the someone that you're addressing? And this is kind of a way to think about maybe how big or small you want that audience to be, how specific the problem is, and who you're going to be appealing to as your action taker, the people who could take an action that you're proposing they should take, right? So was the problem a local or global one? Who is affected or interested in it? And then again, who is the audience for that proposal? So to give some, kind of different types of examples, we think of, we're going to look in a screencast right after this one on a student example from that chapter where the writer there is proposing that we lift the ban on non-Native Americans being able to run for president of the United States. Now that's a national issue. In a sense, it affects all Americans. So they're trying to convince everyone who reads it to get behind changing legislation, making an amendment to the Constitution to allow non-Native Americans to run for president. So that'd be a national issue. Now, I've also had people write great proposals on incredibly small audiences and dealing with very small communities. So, of course, you could write a proposal on maybe changing something on Wayne State's campus. So perhaps you think it's a problem that the library is only open till a certain time a certain night, and you think it should be open longer to accommodate people who do a lot of their studying after hours, right? So that's you're going to identify that as a problem, you're going to propose a solution, your audience is going to be people who can take action at the university. But even there, you might have to think, well, who are the action takers? Are you trying to convince the administration, the ones who actually maybe have the power to make that change? Or are you trying to convince the students of the university to put pressure on the administration to make that change? So if we go back to that first example, the idea of changing the applicable laws so that a non-Native American can run for president, the student chose to write that piece to convince voters to support that legislation and to kind of write to their representatives in Congress and so forth. But they could have also written to Congress directly, right? So you got to decide, even if you once you've limited the problem and you've decided on one, what's the particular audience you want to take up there? If you want to make the kind of audience and the situation even smaller, I've had people write really great proposals on something as specific as trying to convince their parents that they should buy them a car, right? So this is a problem, at least for you, perhaps, right? That you don't have a car, you're a college student, you need to go certain places, and you want your parents to, you're proposing to your parents that they help you out with this situation. So there's, of course, a big difference between that kind of proposal and one about changing fairly important long-standing legislation in the United States, but they're both proposals. They both fit within that genre. So that kind of gives you an idea of the breadth, like how wide the range of different proposals you can write is, but also how they're all, no matter what you're writing about, they're all going to be similar in a number of different regards. One of those is point number 2 here. Proposals are always focused on a problem, right? So it might be a problem that your audience realizes is a problem. So most people would realize that maybe parking at Wayne State is a problem. People know it's a problem. The situation there is no one knows how to solve it, right? But there's other things that people might not realize are a problem at all. In that case, you have to convince them that the problem exists, right? So another question you have to ask is, are you writing about a problem that the audience that you're writing to is already aware of, or do you have to convince them that it's a problem that exists? And then you might think about, again, how serious is the problem, and then what are the negative consequences that will occur if the problem is not fixed or solved. So we're going to talk a lot about consequences and thinking about proposals. On the one hand, you've got to emphasize the negative consequences of the problem if left unaddressed in order to kind of motivate your audience to take action, to show them that it's an urgent problem that it needs to be fixed. You also want to emphasize the positive consequences that will happen if the problem is fixed. Again, that's for the same reasons. It's an added incentive to your audience if they can think of all the positive things that will happen once this problem is solved, right? And then finally, number 3, proposals also convince the audience the solution being proposed is fair and feasible. So here again, you got to think about the multiple audiences involved here. Are they going to be, are all the involved parties going to be fairly treated? Just the kind of bare question of feasibility, right? How do you convince your audience that the solution that you're proposing is itself one that's practical, that it can be achieved, and that it can be done? So those are different elements you want to think about, and hopefully at least these kinds of questions will be useful to you in brainstorming what kind of problem you want to take up for your project. Now again, you might already know the solution to it, or you might not know the solution yet, and you want to do some research to think about how you're going to solve the problem. And that chapter in Scenes of Writing we'll talk about tomorrow, and that I suggest that you start reading as soon as you can, does kind of walk you through the steps of doing research to try to find a solution to a particular problem. So those are the basics of proposals. Hopefully those questions will mentioned here will help you kind of brainstorm a possible topic. If you want to run some topics by me, or maybe talk to me face-to-face or over the phone or via email about how you can come up with a great topic, I'd be happy to do that as well. And then we're going to look at a sample essay in a screencast in just a moment, which maybe will help solidify some of these points when you see them in action.